the ghost ship that sailed with no crew. Real mystery of the Mary Celeste. The sea was calm on the morning of December the 5th, 1872. The Atlantic stretched wide, endless and blue, when a small British ship named Dei Gratia spotted something unusual drifting near the Azores Islands. At first glance, it looked like just another merchant vessel making its way slowly across the water. But something about the way it moved was wrong. Its sails were partly set but loose, flapping in the wind without direction. The ship swayed oddly, as though no steady hand guided the wheel. Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia studied it through his spyglass. His stomach tightened. The drifting ship was the Mary Celeste, an American brigantine that had left New York only a month before, carrying a full cargo of industrial alcohol. Morehouse even knew its captain, Benjamin Briggs, a respected sailor, traveling with his wife and young daughter. They had set sail with a crew of 7, bound for Genoa, Italy. By all accounts, the voyage had been routine. So why did the Mary Celeste look deserted now? Morehouse gave the order. A small boarding party climbed into a boat and rowed toward the mysterious vessel. As they drew closer, the silence became heavy. No voices, no movement. Only the creak of wood and the slap of waves against the hull. The Mary Celeste towered above them like a floating tomb. When the sailors pulled themselves aboard, the first thing they noticed was the eerie emptiness. The deck was still. Ropes lay neatly coiled. The wheel spun slightly with the breeze. A single frayed rope trailed into the ocean as though something, perhaps a lifeboat, had been cut loose. The crew of the Dei Gratia called out, their voices echoing across the planks. "Hello, is anyone here?" Only silence answered. Cautiously, they moved below deck. What they found was stranger still. The cabins were neat, almost normal. The captain's quarters contained clothes folded in drawers, his wife's sewing kit, and even a small child's toy left on the bed. In the galley, food sat untouched, ready to eat. A sewing machine rested on a table with fabric still threaded. It was as though the crew had vanished in the middle of an ordinary day. Even the cargo, 70 barrels of industrial alcohol, was intact. Not one was missing. And yet the lifeboat was gone, suggesting the crew had abandoned ship. But why would they leave behind their possessions, their navigation equipment, and their meals? There was no sign of fire, no storm damage, no attack. The mystery deepened with every step. In the captain's cabin, one sailor found the ship's logbook. Its final entry was dated 10 days earlier, noting that all had been well. After that, nothing. No explanation, no farewell. Just silence. As the boarding party returned to their captain, they realized they were standing inside one of the strangest puzzles in maritime history. A seaworthy ship with food, cargo, and supplies intact, yet utterly abandoned. The men looked back one last time at the deserted deck, the child's toy lying motionless on the bed, the logbook's unfinished pages fluttering in the breeze. Somewhere between New York and the Azores, the captain, his family, and his crew had simply vanished into the ocean air. And as night began to fall on the Atlantic, one chilling question hung over everyone who stood on deck that day. What had driven the crew of the Mary Celeste to leave their ship forever? The crew of the Dei Gratia worked carefully as they sailed the abandoned vessel toward Gibraltar. Though seaworthy, the Mary Celeste carried with it an air of unease. Every creak of its timbers, every groan of the ropes, seemed louder when no human voices filled the air. To sail a ghost ship was unsettling enough, but to sleep aboard it, knowing a family and crew had vanished without a trace, was worse. At night, the sailors swore they heard faint sounds below deck, a shuffle of boots, the scrape of a chair moving. Once, one man claimed he heard a child's laugh echo through the cabin, where the Briggs family had stayed. Others dismissed it as nerves, the mind playing tricks in the silence of the sea. Still, the feeling lingered. The ship was not truly empty. By day, the men searched every inch of the vessel, hoping to find clues. The cargo hold revealed there were 7 barrels of industrial alcohol stacked neatly. But when they opened a few, they noticed something strange. Several were half empty, not because they had been tapped, but because they had leaked. The fumes of raw alcohol drifted up, sharp and stinging to the nose. Some later suggested that a sudden rush of these fumes might have frightened the crew, leading them to abandon ship in haste. But if that was true, why hadn't they returned once the danger passed? In the captain's cabin, the logbook gave one of the few solid pieces of evidence. The final entry, dated November 25th, placed the ship near the Azores Islands, exactly where it had been found. The handwriting was neat and calm, with no sign of distress. 10 days later, the ship was drifting, lifeboat gone, crew vanished. What had happened in those missing days remained a blank. The personal belongings deepened the mystery, clothes still folded, pipes and tobacco untouched. A sewing machine set out with half-mended fabric. Even valuables like jewellery were stilt. Still a present, hardly the scene of a pirate attack or mutiny. Whoever left the Mary Celeste did so without packing, as though they expected to return quickly. On the deck, sailors noticed something else unsettling. Faint, damp footprints led toward the railing. They stopped there, abruptly, as if someone had stepped to the edge and disappeared. The marks were so light that they might have been made long before. Still, they added to the creeping sense that the ship was holding on to the last traces of its missing crew. By the time the Mary Celeste reached Gibraltar, the ship had already earned its eerie reputation. Dock workers who came aboard whispered that it was cursed. They refused to linger in the cabins where the Briggs family had stayed. Some said the air itself felt heavier there, as if the walls still remembered the voices that had once filled them. Officials launched an inquiry. They inspected the ship for signs of foul play, but none were found. There were no bloodstains, no broken locks, no clear signs of violence. The missing lifeboat remained the only practical clue. The crew had left, voluntarily or otherwise, and never returned. But the question remained, what had driven them away? Theories began to swirl like storms across the docks. Some said pirates had attacked but spared the cargo for unknown reasons. Others insisted a mutiny had occurred, though no evidence supported it. More imaginative minds suggested a seaquake or waterspout had terrified the crew, and then there were the darker whispers that the Mary Celeste had sailed into something beyond human understanding. One dock worker told a reporter that, on the night the ship was moored, he heard a bell ring 3 times from the empty deck. When he went to check, nothing was there. Another swore that the sound of a woman's voice singing faintly came from the captain's cabin after midnight. Officials dismissed these accounts as gossip, but the whispers spread faster than the official reports. The Briggs family and their crew were never found. No bodies washed ashore. No lifeboat was ever discovered. It was as if they had stepped off the edge of the earth, leaving behind a ship that sailed on without them. And so the Mary Celeste was left with 2 identities. On one hand, a working vessel, perfectly seaworthy. On the other, a haunted relic of the sea, a reminder that sometimes people can vanish into thin air while everything around them remains untouched. As the inquiry ended with more questions than answers, one thing was certain. The mystery was only beginning. For even as the ship was released back to sea, stories of ghostly footsteps, sudden screams, and unexplained shadows followed it wherever it went. And soon, sailors would begin to ask themselves a terrifying question. What if the Mary Celeste had not been abandoned at all, but was still inhabited by something unseen? When the Mary Celeste was finally brought into Gibraltar in December 1872, the abandoned ship became the focus of one of the strangest maritime inquiries in history. The British Vice Admiralty Court took charge of the investigation, with Judge Frederick Solly Flood presiding. Solly Flood was known as a sharp but skeptical man, and he was determined to find a practical answer to the mystery. Yet the deeper the inquiry went, the more unsettling the puzzle became. From the beginning, the facts seemed impossible to reconcile. The ship was seaworthy, the sails in good enough condition, and the pumps functioning. There were no signs of fire or structural damage. The cargo of alcohol barrels, though several had leaked, remained largely intact. Provisions, food, water, even medical supplies were still plentiful. And yet the crew, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their young daughter Sophia were gone, along with 7 sailors. The missing lifeboat suggested abandonment, but there was no clear reason for why trained seafarers would desert a perfectly capable ship in the middle of the Atlantic. No storm had been recorded in the area, and pirates had not been reported nearby. The idea of mutiny was considered but quickly dismissed. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no broken locks, and most importantly, no missing valuables. The inquiry quickly turned to the strange state of the cargo. Out of 1,701 barrels of alcohol, 9 had leaked. The barrels in question were made of red oak, a wood more porous than the white oak used for the rest. Inspectors noted that fumes might have built up in the hold. If Captain Briggs had gone down and smelled alcohol vapors, he might have feared an imminent explosion. In such a case, ordering the crew into the lifeboat until the fumes cleared might have seemed the safest choice. But if the lifeboat had been cut loose and the rope snapped, or if the weather had turned suddenly, the ship could have drifted away, leaving the crew stranded at sea. This alcohol fumes theory became one of the leading natural explanations, but it was not airtight. Critics argued that no signs of fire or scorching were found on the ship. Others pointed out that Captain Briggs was an experienced sailor, unlikely to panic over a temporary danger. Still, the idea of explosive fumes remained persuasive to many officials at the time. Another theory was raised, the possibility of a seaquake. Earthquakes beneath the ocean floor can produce sudden, violent waves, powerful enough to frighten a crew into abandoning ship. Some sailors speculated that if the Mary Celeste had been rocked by such a phenomenon, Captain Briggs might have believed the ship was doomed and ordered everyone into the lifeboat. Yet again, this theory had holes. The ship itself showed no damage, and there were no reports of seismic activity recorded in the area. A third theory was waterspouts, towering, tornado-like columns of water that can appear suddenly at sea. If a waterspout had struck near the ship, it might have drenched the deck, frightened the crew, and convinced them that the vessel was sinking. But the ship was dry when found, with no evidence of such an event. Mutiny and piracy refused to die as theories, no matter how much evidence argued against them. Some officials wondered if the crew had turned against Briggs. Yet those who knew Briggs described him as a fair and steady captain, respected by his men. And again, nothing had been stolen. Piracy seemed equally weak. Why would pirates leave the cargo and valuables untouched? As the inquiry dragged on, Judge Sollyflood began to suspect foul play. Not from the missing crew, but from the men of the Dei Gratia. He speculated that Captain Morehouse and his sailors might have ambushed the Mary Celeste, killed its crew, and then sailed the empty ship to Gibraltar to claim salvage rights. But when this idea was tested, it quickly unraveled. The timelines did not match. The Dei Gratia had left port 8 days after the Mary Celeste. It would have been impossible to overtake and ambush the ship without leaving some evidence of struggle. In the end, Sollyflood had no proof to support the accusation, and the inquiry closed with no definitive conclusion. The men of the Dei Gratia received their salvage reward, though it was smaller than expected as lingering suspicions haunted them. With no official answer, the mystery began to grow in the public imagination. Newspapers in Europe and America seized on the story, spinning it into one of the greatest maritime legends of the 19th century. Writers filled in the blanks with their own ideas, some rational, others fantastical. Soon the Mary Celeste was no longer just a missing crew case. It was the ghost ship. One of the earliest and most popular supernatural theories claimed the ship was cursed. Some said the alcohol cargo itself carried dark luck, releasing invisible spirits when the barrels leaked. Others pointed to the Briggs family, suggesting they had offended fates, T-Bob bringing their young daughter on a long sea voyage. More than one sailor whispered that the family's voices could still be heard in the captain's cabin. Ghost sightings soon became part of the tale. Dock workers claimed to see a woman in white standing at the bow at night, staring into the waves. A sailor who later worked aboard the ship swore that he felt unseen hands on the wheel as he tried to steer. These accounts, unverifiable as they were, spread like wildfire, strengthening the ship's reputation as haunted. Superstitions deepened with each retelling. Some believed the Mary Celeste had sailed through the Bermuda Triangle, though geographically this was impossible. Others claimed the crew had been abducted by sea monsters or swept away by giant waves. A few even argued that extraterrestrial forces were at play, pointing to the total absence of any human traces as proof. Yet even amid the wild stories, the natural theories remained alive. Scientists debated whether alcohol fumes or sudden storms could explain the abandonment. But the lack of physical evidence, no scorched planks, no wrecked sails, no damaged cargo, kept the mystery unresolved. As the years passed, the ship continued to sail under new owners, but its reputation clung like a shadow. Sailors dreaded serving aboard her. Rumors claimed that men heard footsteps at night or voices whispering in the dark. A few desertions were blamed directly on the Mary Celeste's haunted name. The more she sailed, the more her legend grew. The ghostly reputation also entered popular culture. Newspapers published serialized accounts of her mystery. Storytellers exaggerated the details. By the late 1800s, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, even wrote a fictionalized version of the tale that cemented the ship's ghostly identity in the minds of readers. Though Doyle changed names and details, the core image of a crewless ship, adrift at sea, became iconic. And yet, for all the stories, the central question remained the same. Why had a ship with food, water, and supplies, perfectly seaworthy, been left adrift, empty, in the middle of the Atlantic? The inquiry had closed, the evidence had been logged, but the answers slipped away like the tide. By the end of the 19th century, the Mary Celeste was no longer just a maritime case. It was a cautionary tale, a ghost story, and a legend rolled into one. Sailors continued to fear her name. Dockside gossip painted her as cursed. And though historians debated natural explanations, the sea itself seemed to guard its secret. For what happened in late November of 1872, somewhere between New York and the Azores, was never seen by human eyes again. The Mary Celeste left Gibraltar in early 1873, released from official inquiry and returned to service. On the surface, it was once again just a working brigantine, carrying cargo across the Atlantic. But no amount of paperwork or repairs could shake its new identity. To sailors, it was no longer simply the Mary Celeste. It was the ghost ship. For years after, captains found it difficult to recruit crews. Men whispered about strange happenings on board, footsteps pacing the deck at night, the feeling of eyes watching them from the shadows, objects shifting when no one was near. These stories spread from port to port, growing darker with each retelling. Even when voyages were uneventful, the ship's reputation ensured that every creak of timber or shift of rope became evidence of a haunting. The ship changed owners many times, each captain hoping to make profit where the last had failed. But the Mary Celeste seemed cursed with misfortune. She often sailed half-crewed or with sailors who drank heavily to ease their nerves. Profits dwindled. By the 1880s, she was no longer the proud vessel that had left New York under Captain Briggs. She had become a ship most men refused to sail. And yet, she continued, ever to drift across the Atlantic, her sails catching the same winds that had carried her into legend. Each new owner hoped to erase her past, but the ghost story followed her like a shadow. In taverns along the waterfront, sailors still spoke of the vanished Briggs family, of the empty lifeboat, of the footprints that ended at the rail. Some even claimed the ship was cursed to wander, until every secret of that voyage was known. By 1885, more than a decade after her crew disappeared, the Mary Celeste met her final fate. Under the ownership of Captain Gilman Parker, she sailed toward Haiti, carrying a cargo of cheap, nearly worthless goods. It was later discovered that Parker had insured the cargo at an inflated value, hoping to cash in through fraud. The plan was simple: run the ship aground, claim the insurance, and move on. But the Mary Celeste did not go quietly. In January 1885, she struck a reef off the coast of Haiti and lodged fast. The ship broke under the waves, battered beyond repair. Parker and his men escaped, but their scheme was soon uncovered. He was tried for insurance fraud, disgraced, and died only a few years later in poverty. The Mary Celeste, once a proud merchant brigantine, now lay splintered on the reef, her timbers rotting in the Caribbean sun. Her physical body was gone, but her legend had only just begun. Even in death, the ship remained alive in stories. Writers and journalists could not resist the mystery. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's fictionalized tale, published in 1884, gave the ghost ship its most famous nickname and spread the story across the English-speaking world. Though Doyle exaggerated details and invented others, his story ensured the Mary Celeste would never be forgotten. Through the 20th century, the legend grew. Documentaries, books and films all revisited the case, each adding new theories or reshaping old ones. Some pointed again to alcohol fumes. Others returned to ideas of mutiny, piracy, or natural disaster. But no theory ever answered all the questions. And so, the mystery endured. Today, more than 150 years later, the Mary Celeste remains the most famous ghost ship in history. Maritime historians continue to debate the facts, yet the story survives because of what is missing. No logbook explains the final decision. No lifeboat was ever found. No human remains washed ashore. It is this perfect silence that makes the case so haunting. What truly happened in November of 1872 is still unknown. Perhaps the brig's family and crew panicked over fumes and tried to save themselves. Perhaps a freak wave carried away their lifeboat. Perhaps something stranger still took them from the deck that day. Whatever the truth, the result is the same. A perfectly good ship sailed on, without her people, across a calm sea into the pages of history. The wreck off Haiti has long since decayed, but sailors still tell the story. The Mary Celeste appears in lists of the world's greatest mysteries alongside lost cities and vanished flights. For historians, it is a puzzle without a solution. For storytellers, it is a reminder that sometimes the sea keeps its secrets forever.